Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's City of Casa Grande study session. I think we're going to talk about PSPRS tonight. So, Larry, I'll hand it off to you, and you can introduce the subject.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for your time this evening. Our study session tonight will focus on the public safety personnel retirement system, and particularly the unfunded actuarial liability that we've got in our two systems. And I've asked Mr. Barber to give the mayor and council a presentation. I know all of you have, perhaps excluding Mr. Lavender, have had an update on this a couple of years ago, and we had Mr. Nick Ponder come down from the league and really give an overview of what created the circumstances that we were dealing with. I know that Scott's going to highlight a couple of elements tonight as well, but ultimately what we're going to be asking mayor and council for is a bit of a direction on whether or not we should be pursuing other financing options. But I'll let Scott go through his presentation, and I've got a few comments when we're done, and then we'll entertain the questions of the mayor and council.
Thank you, Larry. I want to talk to you this evening about a particular issue that's been around for a very long time, and that is the unfunded actuarial liability that exists within the public safety personal retirement system of the city of Casa Grande. By way of background, and this is important to note to be able to draw the distinction, public employees in Arizona are members of one or two retirement systems. Number one is the Arizona State Retirement System. There are 667 participating employers in the plan, but only one plan. The whole plan, one plan, covers everybody. The contributions that are made by employees and the employers are the same. And so what happens with one happens to all. It's one pooled plan. The Arizona Public Safety Personnel Retirement System, however, consists of three different systems. That is the Public Safety Retirement System, the Elected Officials Retirement System, and the Correctional Officer Retirement System, which includes not only correctional officers, but potentially public safety dispatchers as well. So there are three plans in the PSPRS. But just thinking about the PSPRS specifically, because that's the only one that applies to us, in PSPRS, there are 229 separate individual plans. City of Casa Grande Police Department, City of Casa Grande Fire Department are different separate plans. And each of the plans receives an actuarial evaluation each year. The employee contribution that our employees pay toward that system is set by Arizona law, but the employer contribution is set by actuarial science, if you will. The actuaries set that. Every year, they conduct an actuarial analysis of every one of the separate 229 plans to determine what the employer contribution will be for that specific plan. So you can see the difference between the two. And there's a lot of important differences. Why we ended up with that? There's a variety of reasons, but it is what it is. And so all of our employees, except uniformed police and fire, are in the Arizona State Retirement System. And our public safety employees' uniforms are in the Public Safety Personnel Retirement System. The retirement system has been around for a long time, and there came to a point a number of years ago looking at the performance of the plan, the actuarial dynamics, the specific dollars that were involved, and it came to be a situation where the system was declared to be unsustainable over the course of time. In other words, going like it was in terms of contributions and benefits was not going to be able to be sustained over time. Even the former director of PSPRS declared that to be. Some things needed to be changed. In all fairness, the Arizona State Legislature tried to make some changes that needed to take place. Some of the smaller ones were accepted. Some of the other ones were challenged legally, and as a matter of fact, they had to be reversed because the plaintiffs in these cases prevailed, and so those reforms had to be backed out. So knowing that something had to be done, the League of Cities and Towns, in conjunction with the City Managers Association and the Finance Officers Association, decided to bring a task force together to try to look at this issue and determine how we were going to move forward. And so that group was put together in 2014. There were 15 members. I was fortunate enough to serve as a league representative on that committee. And we met for a year And it was a rather immersive experience in what's happening in public pensions across the country. And we brought in experts from think tanks and other places and really studied this issue. And the work product that came out of that group was what we call a yardstick. It wasn't necessarily this is what should be done, but rather this is a measure to determine if a pension plan is what it ought to be. And as a matter of fact, I stood right at this place in October of 2015, and I briefed the council at that time on the work of the task force, and members of our task force briefed others all around the state. And so the yardstick report came out in 2015. And between what the legislature was able to do, but more specifically what Arizona voters were willing to do, most of the major issues in the yardstick report were actually addressed. And a new tier, a new group, a new category was created in PSPRS so that all new employees that came in would be going into the new system. And the new system would be under different rules. Those plaintiffs I talked about in the PSPRS litigation, they prevailed because the Constitution says that you can't withdraw a promised benefit. And so those two cases came out of that, and there was a lot of work that had to be done to undo that. So it was a great opportunity to move forward from where we were at that particular point in time. And thanks to the voters of Arizona and what the state legislature did and the leadership there to get this done, stop the bleeding, as it were. But all of the legacy, Tier 1 and Tier 2, all of the legacy folks continued to be there. And the biggest part of that was this issue of unfunded actuarial liability. That is, that all of the entities were making their normal contributions, but this unfunded liability continued to be out there. And according to the most current actuarial report that PSPRS has done, the current, as of 6/30/20, the current unfunded actuarial liability in the public safety retirement system is over $9.8 billion. So it's a large number, and when you think about the number of DPS officers there are in the state and the number of cities and towns that have police departments and fire departments and what have you, so it's a huge number. And so the challenge then is, okay, we've stopped the bleeding, we're going to be able to move forward and not add to that with new people coming on board. But what are we going to do about this? And so there's been a lot of different things that have taken place. I want to talk a minute about our particular situation, what our part of that huge liability is. And again, this is for the actuarial report ending 6/30/20. This is the report that will be reflected for us in our budget, which begins on July 1st, 2021. Our unfunded actuarial liability in the police department stands at just over $35 million right now. And the fire department liability is $20 million, so a combined liability of over $55.4 million. That's our current unfunded actuarial liability between our two plans. Now, I hasten to say that liability is currently being financed in the rates that we pay. Every employee, we have a percentage that we pay. The employee pays in their 7.65%, and the employer pays in our share, which is set again every year by an actuarial study. So our debt is currently being financed within the rates that we're paying. What are the rates that we're paying? These are the rates that will be effective in our new budget year, 7/1/21. Our combined police rate will be 68.43%. That means that for every dollar that we pay a uniformed police officer, we're paying 68.43 cents for just public safety retirement. Our rate for the unfunded actuarial liability is 58.27%. So you can see what the normal contribution is and then what the legacy contribution is. Over in the fire department, the total rate will be 45.51%, and the unfunded liability percentage is 32.54. Again, you can see the difference between the unfunded liability that we're paying and the normal contribution. What does that mean in terms of dollars? In fiscal 21-22, The city of Casa Grande is projected to spend a little over $4.1 million for our public safety retirement unfunded actuarial liability. So of all of the dollars that we're going to pay in to the public safety system, we're going to be paying $4.154 million for the legacy liability. Those are the dollars that are reflected in those rates listed up above there. And I used the PowerPoint presentation so you could see those things and hopefully be a little more graphic for us to be able to see. So what are we and the other 200 odd members of PSPRS, what can we do about that unfunded liability? The fact of the matter is that it was just kind of ignored for a long time, and the generally accepted Government Accounting Standards Board changed their rules a number of years ago and said that you have to reflect this liability in every one of your financial statements. Yes, Mayor?
Before you get too far away from that one slide, just so I understand, if you could back up one. So we pay for police 68.43%, or 68 cents on the dollar. But of that 68 cents, the unfunded portion is 58? Is that 58 in the 68 or 68?
Yeah.
It's part of the 68, right?
That's right. The difference
Okay.
between
So
68
if we had paid off, if we paid everything off, we'd be only paying 10 cents,
That's right.
10%.
We would be making, if our pension program was 100% funded, we would only be paying the normal cost. You're exactly right. The difference
Okay.
between those two numbers.
All right, I just want to make that clear. Same thing on the fire then. 32% of that 445 is unfunded liability.
Normal cost is about 13%. Yes,
Okay,
you're exactly
okay.
right.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So there are some things that they were even identified as the pension task force met about what we might be able to do to mitigate that over the course of time. I mentioned that every year our certified annual financial report has to include this as part of our debt, because it's debt, just the same as any other debt we have. It's just financed within the PSPRS and within those rates. So there are several things that were identified that we could do to try to begin to buy down that $55 million. One of the things that we could do, and we have done, and that is we could prepay the full annual required contributions on July 1st of each year. So we have an estimated payroll that we're going to be basing that on, and we pay that in lump sum to the Public Safety Retirement Group, and reason that that's being done is that the investment that PSPRS makes generally they yield better yield than what we're able to do through where our investments are there in the GIP, pretty much, I guess. So that's the issue, is the difference there can also help pare that down. The other thing is that you may know that we have the deferred retirement option program for PSPRS. So if someone achieves normal retirement as defined by the statutes, they can enter the drop program and they stop paying their contributions and we stop making the match. And what would be their retirement, and they can continue to work, and what would be their retirement payment goes into their drop account, and they can stay in the drop program for up to five years. If we continue to make our share of the contributions for those employees in the drop program, it's not very much, but it's a little something. And we can do that, and in fact, we have done that. The fourth thing is take a look at fund balance. If you have cash that's available, and some communities have done that, they've applied cash that they had against the unfunded liability. The final one, I think it's only been done in the city of Prescott, but they could levy a tax. They could levy a secondary tax that's dedicated to paying down the debt. And that's what they did in the city of Prescott. Or, there's one additional opportunity, that is issue bonds as an alternative financing choice for the unfunded liability. We're already financing the debt within the PSPRS system. Issuing bonds is simply an alternate method to fund that unfunded actuarial liability outside of PSPRS. It's something that's just kind of come up into its own, particularly I read about issues in California, and here in Arizona, that's who's done it so far. City of Flagstaff and Yuma, Pinal and Gila counties, and last week the city of Tucson issued $658 million in bonds. They're not going to be 100% funded, but they're going to be 75. They're chipping away at the debt because that, in terms of what they can service and their particular circumstances dictate that. So you can see what's happened, and certainly we're a city here in Pinal County, and Pinal County jumped on this fairly early, and they financed their $89 million liability, and that is in PSPRS. For them, it's PSPRS, elected officials, and corrections officers. That's they're all in all three plans. So these are those who have done it. We've been watching this carefully, and over the last number of months, a staff has met to talk about this and evaluate whether it's something that we may suit us, and obviously that's your decision, your direction to give us. If we go this direction, there are some good things that will happen. We can achieve some budgetary savings. We don't have the numbers at this point in time, but I've already indicated to you that next year we'll be paying about $4.1 million just against the legacy debt. Depending on the issue and the amount of the issue and the interest rate we pay, we could create some budgetary flexibility if our debt service payment is less than the PSPRS rate, so to speak. The other thing is that we could they call it chopping down the mountain of escalating payments. We have the numbers that PSPRS has for our debt over the next 17 years. And if you look at it, and we're about, from one of our plans, about $2 million. And by the time year 17 comes across, we're paying about $4 million for the legacy. So we chop that down and achieve a predictable, regular interest payment, bond payment, not interest payment, bond payment across the term of the bonds. So we chop that mountain down. We're not going up here, and this becomes the savings that we potentially achieve. These are also taxable bonds, pretty much the ones we've looked at. They're not tax-free bonds. We talk about general obligation bonds and what have you, but these are taxable. And the experts in the field talked about that in this market today, taxable bonds being attractive to investors for reasons that I don't pretend to understand, but they do. And the other thing that we're able to do by doing this taxable bond is we don't consume any of our capacity for the other things we need or may need and want to do. We're talking about general obligation bonds for new facilities. We will not be capturing any of that capacity. And then finally, and this has happened in one or two of the cases here in Arizona, when you think about the term of the bonds, they projected it to be 16, 17, 18, up to 20 years. Because of the circumstances, they were able to chop a year or two off the end, and that results in savings as well. So these are the results or the benefits that might be achieved if we decided to go in this direction. However, there's always risk. And there are 4 specific areas of risk that present themselves. And when I say risk, the easiest way to put that is that we could finance our unfunded liability with bonds, and we could still have some unfunded liability that begins to accrue. It's not going to be $55 million, but it's something to look at. So there are 4 specific things that those that deal in these things, they disclose them as potential issues that might come up. And one is that if the PSPRS investment yield, that is, we're giving the money to public safety retirement, they already have our money, and they invest it, and that they get a yield from that. If that yield is less than, yield is less than the bond issue rate.
Less than or equal
I've got
to.
it backwards, I'm sorry. Yeah. That could possibly create some additional unfunded liability. The actuaries look at these issues and they make projections about payroll increases. You're going to be talking about an issue in the regular meeting that's going to result in some payroll increases. Cost of living adjustments, general adjustments, those things increase the payroll, and those costs also increase. So if the actuarial prediction about payroll increases is less than what they actually are, that's a potential risk as well. One of the issues that created the unfunded liability is within the PSPRS, there are potential for regular permanent base adjustments, or COLAs. And it has to do with the net yield of the investments. If it's over a certain percent, then that percent is captured and distributed back to pensioners. If that could change around, that's one of the assumptions that could mess things up. That's a risk. And finally, every actuarial report relating to pensions uses different tables when they look at all of the lives that are in the plan, and then they project what's going to happen, including mortality tables, and they don't know about early retirement you might offer, or other kinds of incentives. So those are the four basic risks that are out there, and they make sure that everybody understands what those risks are. Now, at least one of the communities that's already done this has sought to mitigate that risk somewhat by creating a contingency fund. So they're issuing the bonds to cover the liability plus a contingency fund to put some money aside in case some of these variables happen. And that's something that we would probably look at as well. So there's benefit and there's risk, just like anything else. Here's the Pinal County deal. This is from the prospectus, or the information that was put out by the bond underwriter after this deal was done. They're $88 million, $86 million of debt. That completely paid off their unfunded actuarial liability. So they became 100% funded when they transferred those dollars to the pension program. Prior to that time, their plan was 53% funded. They achieved an interest rate for the bond financing at 2.61% over the course of the bonds. And that calculated to a net present value of expected savings, when you calculate all the dollars, of about $49.8 million, just under $50 million over the life of the bonds. And that's talking about chopping the mountain down and the savings that are achieved through those two different things. So that's what Pinal County achieved by doing their bond deal. We're working to fully evaluate all of the alternatives, ultimately for presentation to mayor and council. We don't have any numbers at this particular point in time. We have the information from PSPRS that talks about what our payments are going to look like over the next 17 years. But in terms of being able to project savings and what have you, we don't have those numbers. But we wanted to bring the fundamentals to you tonight by way of introduction and by way of answering any questions and determining what direction you'd like to go in from here. And at that point in time, I'll turn it over to Larry.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm having a heck of a time with this stand tonight. Just a couple of things, and Mr. Barber, thank you, Scott, for the presentation. I know that this issue, this matter of trying to find some resolve in this unfunded liability has been a goal of the council. You've articulated to staff on a couple of occasions that you would like us to come up with alternatives. And I think the mayor and council can recall that a couple of years ago, we actually levied a little higher property tax rate in order to achieve some of the mechanisms that Mr. Barber outlined about trying to prepay. And in fact, Mr. McGuire had asked me a question just before the meeting and said, what kind of impact are prepaying and paying more in towards your unfunded liability, what types of impact is that making on the system? And I think it's very easy for the council to see that ultimately we've been attempting to achieve some level of what I would consider to be reduction on that growth of our annual rates. And quite frankly, you notice just through the presentation tonight that it really, all it's done is lessen the impact of what that annual increase is going to be, because we've continued to recognize increases. And so I recognize that having a discussion with any elected body, but certainly for our citizens, it's very difficult to understand why do you want to essentially issue debt for a liability. It seems a bit counterintuitive. And I think the important part and why these organizations around the nation, and Scott outlined many in the state, the reason they're able to achieve this is that the current interest rates in the market of bonds are less than the theoretical interest rate that we're paying in our PSPRS system. And so if we're able to issue debt somewhere in the sub 4, sub 3 range, the theoretical interest that we're paying into PSPRS is roughly 7.3%. So any amount less than that is going to net some level of savings to the organization and to the taxpayers. And so from a staff's perspective, we believe that this is one of the options that would be available to us, but I wanted to present these items to the mayor and council tonight before we ran any numbers or actually assembled a financial and legal team to begin to work through this issue. And I really wanted to gauge whether or not this is something that the council feels that staff ought to be allocating our time towards and ultimately coming back to you for some type of consideration. At least in my mind, I think that based on the unfunded liability that we've talked about, I'm anticipating that under most scenarios that we would be issuing bonds, we're going to see a net present value savings today, and to Scott's point, I believe that we can see some, what I would consider to be some positive annual budget capacity as well through that process. But I'm going to pause there, Mr. Mayor, and if the mayor and council is interested in asking any questions, we certainly stand ready to field them.
First of all, I want to say a couple things. If we can fund this, which I think we can, and you know my position on this, Larry, I think we need to get out from underneath this mountain of debt. And because when I started this 4 years, 2 months ago, we were at 40 million.
Right.
Today we're at 55. And every year we have this conversation, and every year that number keeps getting bigger, even though we're doing all the things we should be doing, prepaying our debt, paying when somebody goes into the drop program. I mean, we continue to pay that into the fund, and even the tax, the property tax that we added onto this to help fund it. It's not taking it down, so we have to do something. And I just think it's imperative that we send the message to you guys that, at least from my perspective, yes, absolutely, we need to do this. And I understand too, the GEO bond has to be, that's approved by the people. A taxable bond is not, right? So the council can issue a taxable bond or direct a taxable bond, is that right? Okay. So we would be saving 32 cents on every dollar for our fire, and we'd be saving 58 cents on every dollar that we are currently putting into the fund on our police. To me, it's a no-brainer. I mean, we have to do something. Because like I said, when I started, it was 40 million, and now it's 55, and I just don't see us getting out from underneath it. And then we have to see some similar savings as the county did, because our numbers are not that far apart from the county. So I know we have different funds, but I would suspect that it might be similar by the time we look at the numbers. And I don't know about our bond rating, maybe is better than theirs, so maybe we'll get better rate than they did. But don't tell the county I said that. But that's my 2 cents on it. I say we need to do it. Does anybody else have a comment that you'd like to make, Matt?
Yep. First of all, a comment I always make about PSPRS is, like the mayor said, it's one thing that I always want to get out from under. And so everybody knows we're statutorily required by the state to participate. This is not of our own making per se.
Right.
We don't control this. This is one way we can. And it is kind of counterintuitive to issue debt to pay debt, but if we can save a lot of money, I'll do it. One of my concerns is, I know it doesn't affect our bond capacity, but Mayor, you kind of hit on it. Would it affect our bond rating? Because I know there's some talk of some other GO-type bonds going out right now. So would it lower our rating so that we would have a higher interest rate on some bonds in the future?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Herman, if I can start the response by going back and just touching just very briefly on a question or a comment that the mayor made related to GO bond versus excise tax, which is a taxable bond here in this particular case. You could, in fact, create a question for a GO bond ballot measure to essentially finance this debt. The important component of it that from a GO bond perspective is that we have a 6%, we have a 6 and a 20% capacity limit, and this would fall into the 6% capacity. So it's a non-parks type of an issuance, And so we would be pushing up against that 6% level very, very quickly. The second is that the homeowners and property owners would repay that debt based on a secondary tax levy that would have to be issued. These excise tax deals, the taxable deals that Scott has pointed out with these other organizations, they do apply against your excise tax bonding capacity. But our capacity in the excise taxes far exceeds what a GO bond would be. And ultimately, under this type of a mechanism, you actually are utilizing the savings that you're recognizing by not paying as high of a rate to the PSPRS to, in essence, service the debt. So there's not another taxing element to the public. There's not a new taxing element to the public.
Would it affect, so for that, it should not affect our bond rating too bad because.
Oh, I'm sorry, and
Yeah.
to the bond rating question, I would not anticipate that it would impact our bond rating.
Because we're actually saving that percentage of that. And, I just heard on the way over here on the radio that interest rates are the cheapest in your lifetime probably right now. So that's advertising, but it's still a good time if you're going to do it. And it's something that we made a deal with everyone, and that's what they deserve, but we're going to have to pay for it. And this is a great way to save that money. And just, it's one of those things you can't sleep at night because it just keeps growing, like the mayor said.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob. First of all, I'd say I've heard of this, I've read articles about it, and generally speaking, I'm in favor of it. I think it's a good move to get this off the books. My concern is that even though we have historically, and I don't know how many years we've been paying towards this to try to work it down, but it keeps on growing. My fear is that under the category of risks, that we'll borrow, we'll pay it off, and then, like the age-old problem, we'll pay off our credit cards, and then they'll come back up. How do we control those annual increases? Won't they still be there even though we pay off the balance? And does this simply make them more manageable? Or I'm just worried that 10 years, 15 years down the road, we'll still be paying those bonds off, and that this deficit may have worked its way back up. How do we manage that?
The risks that we talked about are certainly there, and you speak to that very issue. The fact of the matter is that from an actuarial perspective, the unfunded liability has accrued and built up over the course of time and kind of amassed. If we get back to where we're just paying normal costs, if I understand it right, normal costs are based on the actuarial evaluation of our plans, of all the people in our plans. And so when they talk about normal cost, they're talking about what would normally be required to pay the pension on those employees. So I can't guarantee that it'd be a wash, but the fact of the matter is that you're basically erasing the legacy debt and moving ahead from there. And so that the risk issues, you're gaining the interest rate that you're being paid on your investment. And over the course of the last 10 years, I think it was lower 7% in PSPRS. So those dollars are coming back to you. They're helping to cover that as well. So you have more of those dollars coming. So there are no guarantees, but we're talking about the incremental differences from year to year over the next 16 or 17 years are going to be a lot more manageable in relationship to doing things like creating a contingency fund that we could draw from. It may not answer your question, Councilman.
Well, and what I'm hearing is there's still a lot of unknowns, but my concern still is that unfunded liability would start inching its way back up. And a question, if we paid it off and say under police that it dropped down to roughly 10% city contribution, can we pay more than that?
I I'm not sure. I presume that we could front load as much cash into our accounts that we wanted to.
Well, when you do prepare the presentation, because I think we're generally in favor of this, but I'll personally be looking for some kind of mechanism to prevent
Safeguard.
that from inching back up over the years.
And Scott, if I can add to that, there's two levels, there's two different levels of PSPRS in there too. So if you're older police officers, the ones who've been around a while, have a higher level of that the city's paying for. So with the newer officers that are coming in, our expenses are lower. So as they transition and they work through the system, our costs should come down on a per person basis. Now, our costs are probably going to go up because we're going to probably hire more people, but from a per person standpoint, our costs should come down. So if we can get out from underneath this mountain, there's a combination of things, and I like your idea. I think that's a good idea. We can look at that and see if it's possible. And maybe in the presentation that you guys work on, if we can put that in there.
And Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and particularly to Councilmember Huddleston, the one of the elements that I want to make sure that the council's aware of is that there are a number of components within the PSPRS system that we, as a city, have no control over. As example, and Mr. Barber talks a little bit about the rate of earnings that they're generating. If it falls below that, that naturally is going to create more unfunded liability. Maybe that's what you're referring to, Councilmember Huddleston, and actually will cause our annual rate to go up. And so there are factors, and there's
Larry,
a couple.
that's how we got in this hole in the first place.
Absolutely, there are a couple of factors like that quite frankly, as a participant to the program, with bodies outside of this that govern the parameters of that, decisions that get made there is a potential that those, what I consider to be game rules that we're playing by today, could potentially change. And that could potentially could increase the unfunded liability, could increase our rates. I think the important part, and both Mr. Barber and the mayor touches on this as well, I believe we have better control of that because we're not having to worry about a 60, a 70, an 80% rate. We could actually begin to have what I consider to be some contingency planning that happens annually in your budget process, that you're setting aside a bit of money that should we want to control those rates in the future, it gives us a better chance to manage it on a year-to-year basis, in my opinion.
To the mayor's point, every year that goes by, the people retire. And it's a closed system now, so there's no new people coming in. They're coming into Tier 3. So as those people retire, that liability is terminal at that particular point in time. It's already determined. So that is one of the factors. Eventually, there'll be nobody left in Tier 1 and 2 at some point in time.
But I do want to make a point, just so that everybody's clear, is that this unfunded liability is not like a mortgage. When you pay it off, there's still a potential that there will be costs that get incurred on this simply because of the parameters of the system.
Lisa, you had a question?
Well, and I just wanted to commend you for facing this head on. I mean, this is something, like you said, it's been an issue since I've been on the council. Dick, I'm sure, I mean, it's something that has been brought up. We, at our league trainings, we've gone to meetings trying to identify alternatives and ways we can combat this. So, but we have to stop kicking the can down the road, and it just doesn't seem like it's getting anywhere, although we've made, contributions and got it, a little bit in there. But, so I agree. I would like to see us pursue this. I understand your concerns, Bob, and I would like to see that too. I mean, of course, you've outlined some of the risks, but that contingency planning is going to be critical. And I think when if we move forward on this, I would like to see, an actual number of a financial amount that we feel we can put in that contingency from the beginning. So if we know we are going to contribute this much, we can contribute based on our budget this much every year to help with some of these issues that may rise in the future. But I do believe we have to do something. And Scott, I appreciate your I mean, you're always so good at explaining all this stuff, and it's always, it's just a blur. I know someone interviewed me one day about something with the city, and they said, if there's one thing you can do, get rid of or change, and I'm like, this is it. I wish it would just go away, and, but it's not, and we know it's not. So, but I do think that it's the right thing, to move forward. I know we can continue kicking it down the road, but we need to do something. So I would really like to see us look into it further.
Donna?
And I mean, Scott, as Lisa said, you make it sound so simple. And I think that, it's important that the community understand, that we didn't create this, that it was created for us, and that we've got to do something. I do think that we need to move forward and make some drastic changes. I would be interested, I know that Bob had mentioned putting more money into the plan. I think that is an alternative, but I think if we have a contingency, if we have some money put aside that we're controlling, that I would be a little bit more comfortable with that, because, then they can't play around with it a little bit more. So I think when we have all these numbers that come together, I will feel more comfortable, but I agree. I think it's time that we move forward.
Mr. Powell?
What bothers me is the same thing Bob mentioned, is the fact that we never get ahead. We're always trailing the debt that's out there, even though we think we're doing well. We're staying behind it. And I wonder, do we have enough money in some of our accounts we could take money out and pay a healthy part of this right now?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Powell, I will tell you that I was going to close with that statement, or at least something similar to that, and based on what I'm hearing tonight, we definitely, as a staff, will begin to work with assembling our financial and legal team for the bonds and preparing the various analysis that needs to transpire. But one of the options that staff was anticipating coming to the mayor and council with, as well as a fully funded through bond option, would be an option of using some level of our fund balance to fund towards this. And so there will be an option, Mr. Powell, that we are actually including for the mayor and
Well,
council.
Larry,
to
that's
consider.
one of the things I'm looking at with the construction that's going on,
Right.
and the monies that would be coming in. There's going to be some extra money. And as I say, you don't want to pay and think you're doing well and find out that you're falling behind on this
Right.
thing. So if we could take a good swing at it, it'd be interesting to see how much money we would have available to do that. And we might not get it done completely, but get it more manageable. And
Or
I
do a
think that would be,
combination of-
yeah.
Combination of the
Yeah.
two. Yeah, it's a good idea. Okay. You already talked. Go ahead, man.
I hear new ideas. So, but you did mention the first time the contingency fund. I had that written down in my notes, so I think that goes to, because that's a legitimate concern. The other thing I was thinking is we have that dedicated property tax, kind of. We could keep that in place possibly and use that to fund that part as well. And as well as take, I mean, we're gonna need all of these different things in order to make this work. It's not just a one-shot
Right.
deal.
Right. Good point.
Two closing comments, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
One is that timing-wise, one of the reasons why we're here tonight is that if we decided to go, if you indicated we wanted to go in this direction, budgetary provision has to be made in the 21-22 budget for us to be able to make the payment.
Right.
So that's a budgetary issue. And the second is that the co-chairs of our task force that met in 2014, 2015, interestingly enough, one of them was Mike Townsend, who was the finance director of Coconino County. He now runs public safety retirement. And the other co-chair was Scott McCarty, who is the finance director of the town of Queen Creek. He is the chairman of the board of public safety retirement. So these are two guys that went through the year that I went through, and they get it. They understand this issue and what needs to happen. And there's been some changes at PSPRS about some of their assumptions. They changed actuaries and the direction that they're going in. And Mike Townsend, he's a finance guy that really understands it. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Larry.
Yep.
All right, so let's stand adjourned for about 15 minutes, and we'll start the city council meeting right at 7 o'clock.